Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me back again at the Italian Festival of Creativity. I was with you in Milan a couple of years back, and it's terribly sad that I can't be there again on the stage in that wonderful theater, but hopefully again soon. I'm Ben Jones, Creative Director at Google, and today I want to talk to you about shifts that we're seeing in mindset and behavior related to the pandemic and how to think about it moving forward. In particular, how we think about time, how we think about space, and therefore how we think about the nature of our connections both to each other and to the broader world. And these are just observations. We have pools of data and have done sets of studies, but it's a little more philosophical than that, which I hope that you enjoy. As we think about the before times, it's hard to imagine that world. In some ways, it feels very familiar and very close, and yet at the same time, very far away. And as I approached this presentation, I wanted to understand how we thought about the nature of our time. As we came into it, we were in a state of great urgency where there was this idea that our attention spans were shrinking and we didn't have enough time for anything. We were rushing. And a lot of our technical innovation was focused on making experiences seamless and frictionless because of this tension around time. And then around space, the world felt open to us, obviously, not just physically open and we could travel anywhere, but full of possibility and potential in a way that obviously has changed. So in that world, how do we think about opportunity and connection? We've changed a lot our relationship to technology and changed a lot our relationship to each other because of physical distancing, because of a lack of travel. And all of those things change how we think about technology and how we think with technology. And it changes the nature of the way that we become connected. In particular, I think one thing that we overlook a lot is what's the relationship between our own imaginations, our human imaginations, and technology. Is technology an enabler? Is it extending that imagination, or is it just is it a tool that augments it? Is it changing it somehow? A series of anthropological studies about 5 years ago, trying to understand the explosion in mobile behaviors. And these studies were anthropological in nature. So what is changing about our humanity, our self-perception, that was driving us to spend so much time focused on mobile devices and connected to them? What human behaviors were underneath that? And the idea that we came back with, we called the Quicksilver Self. That is the reason that the phone experience, the mobile experience was so hypnotic, was because of the immense potential of life to be different at any moment. I could get sushi for lunch. I could fly to Latvia. I could learn Swahili because the whole world was open in a door that sat in my pocket. I could go all of these places and do all of these things. And it created this endless, immediate, almost breathless sense of possibility. I think that we saw people looking at the explosion of mobile and the addiction to mobile as a negative. We're down in these little worlds and we're ignoring the beauty of the world around us. But as we studied it, we saw that it was this idea of possibility and connection to possibility and the ability to change that was really so compelling. And in that space, didn't physically disappear, obviously, but our sense of it disappeared. We could be anywhere, we could go anywhere, we could connect to anything. And the challenges of imagination with this new technology is, what will we do with all of this power? Like, how do we understand what we could become as a result of this? If I have in the palm of my hand or in my pocket more power than it took to take men to the moon, what should I do? We didn't have any idea. And so we were trying to grapple with this sense of potential. And oddly, one of the behaviors that came out of it was this explosion of selfies, right? We're taking pictures of ourselves all the time. I've got a selfie stick and I'm looking at myself. And it was a very strange behavior where people thought, well, everyone is just obsessed with themselves all the time, that we've all become narcissists. And we don't believe that that's what happened. We didn't all instantly become narcissists. It was that there was this incredible potential, this change manifesting in us, and we didn't quite believe who we were in the process of being or becoming. And so when I was taking selfies, the expression of the selfie was not, this is me, this is me, this is me, but it was, this is me in this space, in this moment, doing this thing. Like we almost couldn't believe ourselves, and we needed to keep track, and we needed to share, we needed to validate. And so the impulse to say, look at me, was a little bit look at me, but look at me to tell me who I am and how I'm becoming. And so it was this energy of us understanding ourselves through the lens of technology that drastically changed our behavior. In this new world, obviously, many of those dynamics have changed. And so we've carried in this dynamic of the Quicksilver Self and this sense of possibility and this sort of fluid and explosive changing sense of self. But we don't know what it means in the new world. Obviously, the pandemic has changed our understanding of space and time. And so who we think we are and how we understood to move through the world has become very disconnected from the world that we're experiencing. And so I'm going to try and connect some pieces of that for you in this new disorientation. Where we started was the challenge of time, right? We were incredibly busy and we could do all of these things, and the opportunity of space. We could go, I could press a button on my phone, a car would pick me up, I could take a flight and go anywhere. And so the world in some ways was closer in, and the thing that limited the world was my time, right? I could do so much that I couldn't figure out what to do, and we struggled to prioritize. We felt rushed and constrained. And now that's flipped. Now it is the challenge of space. I'm constrained to my home. I am constrained to my neighborhood. I can't go the places that I would like to go, see the people I would like to see. But conversely, we have the opportunity of time. We don't need to travel. And so as I think about the opportunity to come and speak to you in Milan, last week I spoke in the Philippines, the week before that in Turkey, the week before that in London. And each of those times I got to sleep in my own bed and eat meals with my family. And so there is an opportunity in here in not having to travel, and how we can become connected, and how we think about what our space is and the nature of that connection. Let's dig in a little bit into how we think about these changes. There's a part of us that thinks that there's some fundamental humanity underneath there, and the tools are just accessing it, right? I have needs and wants and desires, and those have been the same since time immemorial. But as you can see, once we had mobile devices, they changed us. They changed our behaviors, and they shaped how we looked at the world and looked at ourselves. And we're experiencing that again now as our external world has changed. It's not that there's some core, essential, exact, unchanging humanity. It is a dynamic that changes our sense of ourselves and our connection to each other. So what happens when we look at the behaviors? Well, as we look at search trends at scale, we see three kind of dynamics, and the shapes of the curves that you can see on the screen are the literal shapes of search behaviors. So there are a set of behaviors that are shock behaviors, right? A behavior that suddenly is very powerful, but unlikely to be sustained. Will I make sourdough bread for the rest of my life? Probably not, right? It's a good thing to know how to do, but it's not going to be a sustained behavior. It's a reaction behavior that's very short term. The second is a step change behavior. So this is a behavior that was happening and is changing and is likely to continue to change. And these are a little bit trickier to parse out because, of course, we haven't seen the end of the change. We're just going back into second lockdowns and so on. But we see things like exercise routines changing much more fundamentally, that people are evaluating wellness and the opportunities for wellness and self-care differently. We think those changes are likely to be more durable. And then speed up our behaviors that are happening and have been accelerating, and this has just jumped them forward. So e-commerce is a good example of that. And we're trying to look at these search trends and search behaviors and parse out what do they mean about how we think about our space, and the use of our time. Before, a lot of our behaviors were oriented at saving time, right? Convenience, about frictionless experience. But now that our time has expanded, we're getting a different sense of how we move through time and how we move through space and how we'll use those things. Again, we're disoriented. It's not that we automatically lock in, but it's a different opportunity for us. Two other key shifts that we see. One, we're moving from a third space, right? I've got work and I've got home, to some other space, a cafe, a bar, a social space that is away from home. So from that third space to a third of the space, I'm presenting to you from inside of my house. I work here, I play here, kids are educated here, and so this incredible condensation of space. And secondly, from is it safe? As COVID first hit, we saw incredible surge in exactly the same queries. Is it safe to go to the doctors? Is it safe to go to the market? As those lockdowns ease, we see a shift to, is it worth it? Right? Is it worth it? Is it worth it to, will I get enough out of, is the balance of risk and potential worth it? And the combination of these two things, as you can see, play with space and they play with time and risk, which for all of us become essential points of exploration. As we think about that third space and the shrinking of the third space, we're looking at the behaviors that happen in there differently. A surge, obviously, in searches for food and groceries, for hobbies and leisure, entertainment, health. How will I spend my time in this space? I have more time, I can learn more, I can't go out, and we've fallen back in many ways on our own resources. So remember that Quicksilver Self that I started with, that I can go anywhere or be anything, and my world is filled with this incredible potential. Obviously, that's shifted. It's constrained, and now we're building ourselves. I can do this thing that I have not done before. I can start a garden. I can learn to make that Dalgona coffee. I can find a different kind of experience, but I'm building up from my own resources rather than plugging into this kind of infinite sense of responsibilities. I think that a lot of us obviously feel constraints, terrible constraints, but there are opportunities in this shift of space and time also. And I want to explore what some of those are because they're very central to the idea of connection. So what happens when we're in a third of our 1/3 space? The boundaries collapse for us between work and play, family, comfort, distraction, all those things blur together, and it takes a lot of work. We have to be very intentional about saying, I'm stopping working now, I'm going to be with my family now, I'm going to take some time for myself now. Those things become incredibly challenging in a third of the space that we had before. The challenges that are a part of that we see are challenges of digestion. How are we understanding the information and experiences that we have? Reflection. What does it mean to be a human being in this time? How should I think about my place in the world? How should I think about what's safe and not safe? And the infusion of new things. If I'm always in the same space all the time, I don't see things that I don't intend to see. And that creates great challenges, especially for those of us who are used to living in cities, which I'll talk about in a sec. So when everything must be intentional, right? Everything takes work, everything must be sought out, everything must be considered, and there's no room. We get into smaller and staler spaces and places. And that's a dangerous place because it limits us and it holds us back from growth and exploration. I think, having lived in cities most of my life, the miracle of cities is serendipity. That is, the chance to see something I would not choose to see, a person who's made choices that I would not have chosen to make because there's the rough and tumble of the city. We see fashion, we see relationships, we see amazing, interesting, beautiful people. We see ways of looking at the world that we never would have been exposed to or intentionally chosen to be exposed to. And that roughens our edges and broadens our mind, and it opens the set of possibilities that we have. And I think the tremendous loss of this time is the loss of serendipity. right? The accidental opportunity to grow and learn and connect. That serendipity is the thing that we learn from, that causes us to grow. If we only see the things that we choose to see, then we slow our learning and we slow our growth, and our aperture narrows, so we're not looking at the fullness and the richness of the world. If we're not challenged and if we're not surprised, then slowly we begin to shut down and we get stuck in the same rivers of thought and experience. And as we think about ourselves in that, we can only do what we think to do. What we can't imagine, we can't do. So if our imaginative apertures get constrained, we go into smaller and smaller and smaller spaces, and we're limiting what we're able to think about and consider and weigh. And so I think that the big challenge for COVID now, for this time, is how do we use the tools of technology to pull us up out of that, to engineer some serendipity, or to move outside of those patterns that we see. I think in this, the huge benefit is that we have tools like the one that I'm talking to you through screens and the opportunity to access information, but we're in an information imbalance. We are much more capable of generating and distributing information than we as individuals are able to filter and digest it. And so there are all kinds of tools in place to help us with that. But those tools are limited, and we've been overwhelmed, right? The tools have grown faster than our ability to use them. And I think one of the advantages of the time that we have is that it's enabled us to get better at the digestion, to seek out the information. When we were rushed all the time, we didn't filter in the same way. We didn't have time to consider, and so we relied on what was shouting at us rather than taking the time to choose to pull out things that would be interesting, and to be connected to people that were interesting and not just right in front of us. One area of tremendous growth on YouTube during this time is with me. People seeking out the opportunity to watch videos of people doing something with me, cook with me, clean with me, study with me. We are using the tools of technology to create a community that we can't physically experience. And for me, that's a great example of not just information and not just need fulfillment, but building community through shared activity. As we look at advertising in this world and machine learning and the idea that machines are going to steer us into all of these new directions, the challenge of that is, what information are we putting in? And so my job is to look at ads and help make ads better. If you put 10,000 ads into a machine learning algorithm, what you'll get is a slightly better ad, right? Machine learning can only provide an output that is as good as the inputs. And we need to make sure that those inputs are as rich as they can be, as diverse as they can be, so that the tool is not yet adapted to the world that we're living in. We need to push the tools to take us outside of vanilla ice cream just to get a slightly better vanilla ice cream, but to say what draws our attention, what catches our eye, what stories, not just what ads, but what are all the pieces that I can feed myself with, so that I get new things and exciting things, not just a slight refinement of a thing that I already know or am familiar with. And I look at this through the lens of ads, but it's true of everything. What other stories are out there when we're not using algorithms and an overload of information to narrow what we look at, but instead looking to expand it? One of the amazing projects that has happened at Google is through Google Arts and Culture. The team that runs arts and culture goes into amazing cultural institutions with these incredibly high resolution cameras and photographs things so that we can go and look at them. And through the photography, you can get closer than you've ever had the opportunity to get before, and you can see things that maybe no one has ever seen in the same way. And this is the opportunity, I think, not just to use technology to see things in the way that we would see them, or to see the same things that we would see if we were there, right? Not a diminished version, but an expanded version. This image is the image of the Paris Opera House. It has paintings by Marc Chagall. And when our team was photographing it, we were working with the artist's son to get permissions. And through the photography of the opera house ceiling, they were able to identify off in the corner a small portrait that the artist had done of his son, who was a boy at that time. And his son had never seen it, did not know it was there. It was this magnificent discovery of his own father's work, of an artwork he'd seen, thousands of times before. So as we think about technology and we think about our aperture opening, I think we need to think about it expanding. What can we see that we haven't seen before, or what can we see in a new way? This is another arts and culture project, again, from a year ago, where the patterns of art fed in and connected to selfies generated the ability to see what famous pieces of art you looked like, and therefore what connections or resemblances there may be. And so I'm taking a picture of myself in order to understand something that I can't see or don't see. How am I connected to these works of art? What do they see in me that I don't see? And this is an opportunity of technology, again, not just to feed us what we want or what we know, but to reveal unexpected dimensions of ourselves. So in digesting this shift of space and time and thinking about what it is that we can do that is different to undistance, to build new connections, I think there are three suggestions that I have. Number one, this is probably the first time in history where we are having this experience in common that we are all aware that we are having, right? The transmission of communication means we all know that this pandemic is ripping through the world, that we are locking down, that we should have masks on, and are experiencing the same kind of dislocation. And so there is an opportunity in that to create a sympathetic fellow feeling and to reach out and to connect. And suddenly we all have time that we've never had before. The members of my team have taken advantage of this time to reach out to people, our heroes, to filmmakers, to writers, and invite them to talk to our team. And guess what? We're all at home, right? And we all have time, and we're all feeling stale and small and narrow. And so we're all hungry for that connection. So I would encourage you to identify somebody who you've admired, whose work you've admired, and reach out. People are unbelievably accessible now, and you can get a much closer personal connection than you might otherwise have expected. And it's good for both parties, right? It's good for people, their worlds have narrowed also. And so the opportunity to connect to a new group of people and think in a new way is a seed for them. The second, uncover new behaviors. So as I showed you with the art selfie and the Chagall portrait, take advantage of the technology, not just to look at the same things, not just to replicate the idea of travel, but find entirely new ones. What are the ways that we can use that super high format photography, visit a place we couldn't visit, experience a thing we couldn't have experienced? I think we see this showing up in two places. One is definitely art. There's a huge spike in museum tours, exposures to kind of art. People are traveling in their minds to places that they might never have had the opportunity to. And the other place we see it is in food. People are learning to cook things they would never have learned to cook, would never have been exposed to. And now, again, with the constraint of space and the opportunity of time, there is a chance to bring things into our lives that we wouldn't have done in the world of the Quicksilver Self. And the last thing is about personal information, personal content. The design of systems of information has been to feed us things that we want, things that we're seeking, right? They've been designed for need fulfillment. I want a blue car, I can find a blue car. I want a red shirt, I can get a red shirt. But now that we have the time, we should work to move beyond need fulfillment and to engineer some serendipity, to find not just the things that are being fed to us in this fire hose, but to draw in different influences in new ways. Is that a film festival at home? Is it following a different tranche of people and understanding what they see or the kind of experiences they have? I don't know, but I think that there is a lot out there that is open to us in ways that has never been open before. I hope that you guys have enjoyed this information. I hope that the reflections are helpful for you. And mostly, I hope that it helps to close the distance between all of us, because we've never needed that more than now. Thanks very much for having me, and I look forward to seeing you next time in Milan.